Hi everybody, this is John from BioFrontiers IT again. The purpose of this video is to talk about how we move data to and from the compute cluster. So, I am going to assume that most of you are on Mac or Linux, but if you're on Windows using MOBA Xterm, most of this should still apply and be pretty similar for you. So I'm going to open up a terminal, and right now I'm on my laptop, I'm in my home directory, so if I list the contents of my home directory using ls, you'll see I have a bunch of videos because I've been making them for you all, got a couple of other files and folders. Primarily we're going to focus right now on the Intro to Compute Cluster video. So let's suppose that I want to get this video to Tortuga so that I can run some kind of analysis on it. In your case, you probably aren't going to be analyzing any types of videos, but instead we'll be working with high throughput sequencing data. But in any case, the command that I use primarily to move single files is called secure copy, and the command itself is scp, and its syntax is really similar to copy. So I could specify one or many files that I'd like to move. In this case, there's just one. And the last argument for the command is where I'd like to actually move that. In our case, with secure copy, we want to move files to and from Tortuga. So what I'm going to do is now specify my username at tortuga.colorado.edu, and then I have to put a colon and a location. So I'm going to use a little tilde just to represent my home directory. So when I press enter, it might ask me for a password if I don't have an SSH key. In my case, I actually do have an SSH key, so it's not going to prompt me for a password. But if it did, I would just type my password in. And once I successfully enter my password, or I have a key that works, the command is going to execute. And what we can see is this one file, the intro to compute cluster.mp4 video, took about 0 seconds to move. The total size was 13 megabytes. And now if I log into Tortuga and I list the contents of my home directory, which is where I put the video, we can see that the video appeared right here. So that was pretty easy, right? And it was a nice small file. It was really fast. If it took a little bit longer, the command would just, it would keep running until it was finished. So I'm going to exit Tortuga. I'm back on my laptop, and I'm going to list the contents of my home directory again. And what I can see here is I have this downloads directory. Let's say I wanted to move the entire downloads directory to Tortuga. How do I do that with secure copy? Well, it's almost exactly the same. scp downloads my username at tortuga.colorado.edu, and I want to put it in my home directory. So I press enter. What happens? Downloads is not a regular file. Why is this failing? The reason this is failing is because secure copy expected a regular file and I passed it a directory. So how do we tell secure copy to move an entire directory? To do that, we actually need to use the recursive flag, which is just a lowercase r. So now, when I specify my downloads directory, my username, hostname, and location, and press enter, what we see is that secure copy moves all the files within that directory. And now, when I log into Tortuga, list the contents of my home directory, we can see that the downloads folder here in the bottom left got transferred in its entirety. So that's great, right? Yeah, I think so. I think that's pretty great. But let's go back to our home directory on Tortuga. Let's remove the downloads directory, and let's remove the intro to compute cluster video. And now we're going to exit Tortuga. I'm going to run hostname so you can see I'm back on my laptop, which has a hostname Karma. And I'm going to type clear and press enter so that all this other stuff goes away. So we're back to where we started. The files that I had previously moved to Tortuga have been removed from my home directory. They're still on my laptop in my home directory here, and I want to move them to Tortuga again. But I'm going to use a different command this time, and I'm going to tell you why as well. Before, when we were using secure copy, if my transfer of my downloads folder had gotten interrupted, say after 2 or 3 files, and there were quite a few files left to move after that, when I ran secure copy again, even though I'd already moved 2 or 3 files, it would overwrite them and move the entire directory a second time. Why is that a bad thing? Well, on this scale, it's not such a bad thing because moving the downloads folder only took a couple of seconds. But when we're talking about moving a terabyte or 2 terabytes, or even 100 gigabytes for that matter, If we get interrupted after 70 gigabytes and we run secure copy again, we're going to have to move the 70 gigabytes again and then the remaining 30 to get our full 100 gigabytes moved. So we have a tool called rsync. And rsync syntax is almost exactly like secure copy, except rsync does some intelligent checking so that if you get interrupted halfway through your transfer and run rsync again, before it starts doing anything, it's going to check which parts have already been moved, and then it's going to pick up where it left off. So, how would we move our Intro to Compute Cluster video with rsync? Well, it's almost exactly the same as secure copy, as I mentioned. So rsync, Intro to Compute Cluster, and then user at hostname. And then I just want to put it in my home directory. So when I press enter, it took a little bit longer, and that's because rsync had to check if the file existed or not first, and it doesn't provide as much feedback. But when I go to Tortuga and I list the contents of my home directory, we can see here's the Intro to Compute Cluster video. I'm going to remove that file and exit Tortuga, so back on my laptop. I really like having the feedback to see how fast my transfer's gone. So looking at this command, if I add this -- progress flag and run it again, so now what we have is exactly the same thing. We have rsync -- progress, our file name, Intro to Compute Cluster, and then my username at tortuga.colorado.edu, and the location where I'd like to put this file. So when I run it this time, what you're going to see is that you get an output that's a little bit different than secure copy, but also fairly similar. We can see the total amount of data that moved. We now know that it's 100% of the file. This was our average speed over the course of the transfer, and this was our only file. So when I log into Tortuga this time, list the contents of my directory, here's my video again. So that's great. The last bit now is how do we move a directory with rsync? Well, rsync -r for recursive transfer. I'm going to throw my progress flag in here so that we can see what's happening. I'm going to specify my downloads folder, and then I'm going to specify JODE5573 at tortuga.colorado.edu. Then my location, my home directory. The one thing I'm going to specifically note for you in this command is that when I placed the downloads folder in my command, or typed it, I did not include the trailing slash at the end. The reason for that is if I put this trailing slash here, rsync is actually going to take just the contents of the downloads folder, but not the folder itself. So everything inside of downloads is going to end up in my home directory on Tortuga. If I get rid of that trailing slash, it's going to move the downloads directory and everything inside of it. So that'd be the behavior that we expect, like secure copy. So when I run this command, we see that it's moving one file at a time, but we can see that it moved them all, and it's including the downloads directory as part of the file name. So when I log into Tortuga now, and I list the contents, we see the entire downloads folder and not just everything that was inside of downloads on my laptop. So what's the last step here? Well, I'm in my home directory on Tortuga right now, and I have this folder called Perl, right? And we can see using du that Perl is an empty directory. But let's pretend it's not empty, just for the purposes of this. So when I exit Tortuga and I'm back on my laptop, say I want to get that Perl directory on my laptop. How do I do that? Well, the syntax is exactly the same. You're just reversing the order of your command. So if I were using rsync, R because it's a directory, the progress flag, now it would be user at host, which in this case is Tortuga, tilde for home directory / Perl. I want the Perl directory, and I want to move it here, my current working location. So when I run this command, what we see is that the Perl directory was moved from Tortuga, and now if I list the contents of my home directory on my laptop, here's the Perl directory. Hopefully that was clear. I know it's a lot to take in, but after you move files back and forth a couple of times, which I would recommend doing just for testing purposes, you're going to have a pretty good understanding of both secure copy and rsync, I think. So the last thing I want to point out is you can use rsync and secure copy when you're moving files on the compute cluster. So if I wanted to move this folder called Jamie inside of the Introduction to Git folder, I could type this command like this, and rsync is basically going to take care of it for me. So now inside of Introduction to Git, there's a folder called Jamie. Why would you want to do that? Well, just like moving things remotely, if your copy gets sort of interrupted in the middle, even on the compute cluster, next time you go to copy the same thing, copy is not going to know what already got moved and what didn't. So realistically, using rsync is a way to basically cut down on the amount of time when we're transferring things back and forth. That's about all I've got to cover here, but if you have any questions, I'd encourage you to ask one of the instructors or a member of BioFrontiers IT, and hopefully that was helpful.